We took a trip to Rochester, New York to take a look at a place called the Strong National Museum of Play. Now, if you've never been there, it's a gigantic museum just filled with a whole bunch of toys and especially video games. We saw a whole bunch of really cool items that we're going to be taking a look at in future videos, but in this video right here, we're going to be talking about one specific item. Tetris Giant. Now, I've played Tetris in arcades before, and I've played it a lot at home and on portable systems, but I've never seen an arcade system this big. And when I mean big, I mean giant.
Tetris Giant is obviously a really big arcade system that was released back in 2009 in Japan and in North America in 2010. There are multiple variants of Tetris Giant out in the wild. The one we're going to be taking a look at the most, though, is this one right here with this very large, highly detailed screen that has a bunch of tetrominos that light up beneath it. The other variant doesn't have a monitor at all. Instead, it has a screen shade and a white screen to project images onto it. Now, this is interesting because if you get rid of that screen, you can also project the game up against the wall, making it look even bigger than the one that we got to play. But that's not what we tried. What was available to us at the Strong Museum was this one right here. Regardless of which Tetris Giant model you're likely to find, each one makes use of these gigantic controllers. I mean, take a look at these arcade sticks. Each one has a ball handle that's about the size of a beach ball. I've never seen anything bigger than this. On the sides of the machine, especially just beneath the arcade sticks, you'll see the word Decacon. Now, from what we're to understand, Sega really wanted to turn this into a series of arcade machines, and this was supposed to be the first in the Decacon Deca controller series. Unfortunately, though, as far as we can tell, they never actually made any more of these using these gigantic arcade sticks. On a regular-sized arcade machine, ball-top arcade sticks typically don't actually have a button on them, and that's because the buttons themselves would be located somewhere beneath them. But with this arcade system, well, it has to be changed up a bit. These sticks are so big that you need to use both hands to move them around, and because of that, they've put two buttons on the left and right, so just where you're holding it, you'll be able to push them pretty easily. There's also two start buttons you'll find on the base of the unit itself that aren't attached to the controllers, but luckily you don't really use these buttons that often unless you're playing one specific game mode, but we'll be talking about that a little bit later. Both of these joysticks are nearly identical outside of the color scheme change. The only difference is that the left one is just slightly taller than the right one, and I assume that's just because they wanted to have one a little bit shorter for kids. But of course, Sega had to do one more thing to make these arcade sticks stand out, and that's motion feedback. And oh boy, when you're dealing with arcade sticks this big, the motion feedback is intense. There will be moments when you will be wrestling with the joystick back for control of the game, and it kinda has that same feel of a racing game where a steering wheel would fight back against you. It's the same idea, but for this, it's with Tetris. By looking at this entire arcade setup, you probably assume that Tetris Giant is just called that because it's got big controls, but it goes a little bit deeper than that, because this version of Tetris is its own unique variant that I've only ever seen on this specific arcade system. The game starts off with a selection of gameplay modes: single mode, co-op mode, and versus mode. Within the single mode option, you have the ability to choose between line challenge or score challenge. Now, line challenge is essentially a beginner mode where score challenge is a little bit more difficult. But let's start off with line challenge. The first thought I had when looking at this was, wow, those are really big Tetris pieces. But unfortunately, I was wrong. These tetromino are about the same size you would normally get in an average Tetris game, but the difference here is the grid has changed. You see, the grid on a normal Tetris board is about 10 by 20, and on Tetris Giant, it's a 6 by 7 grid. That means what you're seeing here is just basically a really tiny portion of an existing grid zoomed up. This does change the gameplay significantly though, and in this one mode, it does make it really difficult. The goal of any good Tetris game is to clear lines, and Tetris Giant is no different. But in this mode, you're given 119 seconds to clear as many lines as you can. The twist in the gameplay is to extend your time, and the way you do that is by clearing a group of lines. If you clear one line, you get no time extension whatsoever. If you clear 2 lines, you get 2 seconds extra. If you clear 3 lines, you get 5 seconds. And if you manage to clear 4 lines, you get 20 extra seconds. And that right there is what everyone's playing for. But the difficulty is, with such a small grid, it's really hard to get 4 lines. And to make things a little bit more challenging, there's no way to swap or hold pieces. The only controls you have are the ability to rotate your tetromino using the top left and right buttons, either clockwise or counterclockwise, and moving your joystick left and right to move your tetromino piece left and right on the grid, or moving your joystick down to increase its descent. And for those of you that are looking for an instant or fast drop option by moving the joystick up, well, you won't find that here. And something else you won't find in this version is a game over by stacking tetrominos too high. Line challenge mode is really all about its time limit, so even if you were to overflow the grid with tetrominos, it would get rid of a bulk of them so that you can retry again. This is kind of a great way for people to start off with this game, but for me personally, my favorite single player mode is Score Challenge. When you finish playing Line Challenge mode, you're given a rank, but that rank isn't assigned to any scoreboard or even recorded. But when it comes to Score Challenge, oh, it's recorded all right, recorded up against 1,000 other potential players. The gameplay is almost identical to the previous mode. The only difference here though is that there is no time limit, and even if you just clear one line, that still counts to your overall score and the amount of points that you collect. But on top of that, once you get to the top and you overflow with too many tetrominos, it's game over. They won't clear the board for you, and there are no second tries. That is, unless you want to pay for another round. This game mode is the quintessential example of arcade difficulty really done well. This game mode is addicting and you always want to go back to better your score. But what really gets you is the way that this game plays. Due to its limitations, it almost feels like a refined version of Tetris. Some of the strategies and techniques you may have learned in normal Tetris really don't apply here. You have to think about this in a completely different way. A great example of this is using controlled overflow at the very top of the grid. See, if you can just get one part of the tetromino into the grid, it will remain at the top, and if you can balance that correctly, you can use that to your advantage. The higher you get in Score Challenge, the faster the tetrominos begin to fall, but it all wraps up when you reach the maximum amount of lines, 202. This can make Tetris Giant an exciting challenge out there for gamers that are very familiar with the original games. That challenge is furthered by playing with this joystick, because for many gamers out there, they're typically not used to using something this big. And where a D-pad would give you a much faster response, this one definitely slows you down a little bit. But that slowdown kind of adds to the extreme nature of the gameplay itself. But Tetris Giant isn't just about the single-player experience, it's also about the multiplayer. So let's take a look at the co-op options. Just like the single player, you get a line challenge and a score challenge mode, but they're a little bit different. In Line Challenge, you still have to earn time, but now the screen is split between two. The grid is much larger at 12 by 7, but what really makes it a challenge is that you can't go over to your partner's area. The only space that you can overlap on is the two center lanes. This means you have to totally work in sync with your partner to keep the time limit from depleting all the way. I would argue that this is more challenging than anything in single player because you have to work as a team, but what makes it a little bit easier is that you have a swap option. You can use this up to 3 times, giving you the ability to switch pieces with your partner. It's an incredibly beneficial ability, and either one of you can activate it at any point, and if one of you does it at the wrong time, it can make a situation pretty dicey. Just like Line Challenge in single-player mode, even if you're to stack your tetrominos too high over top of the grid, it wouldn't result in a game over. But in the co-op mode version of Score Challenge, just like the single-player version, it would result in a game over, and folks, let me tell ya, that's where the fun can be had. Outside of that one change, the rules are nearly identical to that of the Line Challenge mode for co-op. But what makes this mode both fun and challenging is that you really only have one chance to get this right, and if you stack your tetrominos too high, it's gonna be an instant game over. And with this game mode, you will actually get a rank, and that rank will be placed publicly for everyone to see on the system, so you really want to try and get it as high as you can. Working together in co-op mode can be really fun, but if you were to personally ask me what the best mode is for multiplayer, well, that would be Versus mode. In Versus mode, it's you and a friend head-on with only your skills in Tetris to guide you. What makes this mode so interesting, though, is that you basically have to fight for the next piece. This is kind of interesting because usually when you're playing Tetris, you know what piece is going to be coming next. But in Versus mode, the next piece in the queue can be taken by either player at any moment. All they need to do is lay down their previous piece as fast as they can, and if you're not paying attention, you might accidentally get the wrong piece at the wrong time when you've been setting up for that next piece in line. You also have the ability to attack your opponent by clearing lines. Now if you clear one line, nothing's going to happen, but if you clear two, they will get a temporary boost in their drop speed. This will only last for one Tetramino piece, but it's enough to really mess up somebody's game. If you clear 3 lines, the drop speed will again increase, but this time it'll increase twice as fast. But if you manage to clear 4 lines, not only will their drop speed increase by 2 times, but they'll also get a line attack. This basically brings up a line from the bottom of the grid, giving your victim far less space to work with. When we first heard about Tetris Giant, we just assumed it was going to be some kind of gimmicky game that just had really large controls, but that's not what this is. The game is honestly really good, and when we got to the Strong Museum and we started playing it, we were just really addicted. We kept playing this game for hours on end, and it made me surprised when I found out that this version of the game has never been released at home. Now look, you can emulate it if you want, but the full experience that you'd be getting from the arcade machine is very different. Those arcade sticks just really change the dynamic of how you're going to play this game. But if they were to release it at home, I think the console for it to be on would be the Nintendo Switch. Due to the use of the zoomed-in grid with those really big pieces, I think that this game would look fantastic on the Nintendo Switch screen. You wouldn't have to strain your eyes or anything like that, and the Nintendo Switch is practically built for multiplayer. This would be one of the best games to have on the go for any Tetris fan out there. But for now, the only official way to play this are the original arcade machines that you can find at places like the Strong Museum. If you ever find one of these out in the wild, you simply have to give it a shot. Believe me, if you're a fan of Tetris, this game is going to completely impress you.
There are a bunch of different versions out there of Tetris that you can play, but this one really stands out for its co-op and versus mode. And even the single-player experience, as weird as it can be, is really fun and enjoyable. If you ever find yourself in Rochester, New York, you gotta go to the Strong Museum. We really want to thank the folks that invited us there to take a look at all their collection, and we promise you folks, really soon, we're gonna be taking a look at a bunch of other items they also had in their collection.